Wonderful. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I always enjoy hearing the warm conversation amongst our guests, and always with a little bit of regret that I have to get in the way of that sometimes, but it's wonderful to see people get together, enjoy one another's company, and for the Canadian Club to be your hosts for that. And I would like to once again welcome you. Good afternoon. Wish you a warm welcome, and thank you again for joining us. And I would like to thank our webcast viewers who will now join us as well. Again, my name is Danny Asaf, and I am the past president of the Canadian Club of Toronto, and thank you all for being here today. Our club, as I mentioned, has offered this forum for leaders, for newsmakers, for thought leaders to share their ideas with us on this nonpartisan, trusted podium. We also, and have always sought, to encourage a diversity of opinions and have worked hard over the years to ensure that that is reflected and that what our great country has to offer in that regard is something that we are able to offer you here as well. Today, today's guest is no exception and a great example of what this club has offered. The Minister of Economic Development and Growth is an important figure in our community and one of those decision makers and thought leaders who we seek out. So before I formally introduce him, I would ask you to give me an indulgence to tell you a little bit about some of our upcoming events here at the Canadian Club. Tomorrow, Thursday, April 5th, we're going to host a celebration of Indigenous youth who will be in conversation with Roberta Jameson of Inspire. And also next week, on Tuesday, April 10th, we're proud to host Blake Hutchison, President and Chief Pension Officer, OMERS, and Chair of Oxford Properties Group, who will be on our podium. To order your tickets or learn more about the club, please visit our website at canadianclub.org. And you can also join the conversation via Twitter and Instagram at CDNCLUBTO or by using that hashtag. Now, I would like to take a moment to express our gratitude for our sponsors. This is a not-for-profit organization, and without them, we would not be able to put on these great events. So I would like to thank these following sponsors for today. Bombardier, represented by Pierre Pune. The Carpenters District of Ontario, represented by Mike York. And the Trillium Automobile Dealers Association, represented by Frank Knott. Thank you very much all for your generous support. I also want to acknowledge the youth and young leaders who are here with us today from the Monk School of Global Affairs, and they're sponsored by Simon Dwyer of Bell Inc. Where are the students, please? Welcome. Great. And I would also like to take a moment to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, as well as VVC for live streaming today's event. And now, on, as I say, to the main event and our guest speaker who has played a leading role in government for many years in some of the most prominent and important departments. I'm told exactly 1 year ago today, our special guest was at this podium. So happy anniversary, and we hope to make this maybe a tradition. At that time, he held the important role of Transportation Minister, and it was a role that he had held since 2014. Earlier this year, the Honourable Stephen Del Duca was transitioned from overseeing transit to now overseeing our economic development and growth. We all know that our province continues to be the engine of Canada's economy. And I say that as an Albertan. Now I live here, I know that the reality. And it is important for all of us here in Ontario and Canada that our economy continues to succeed. And in fact, on many metrics, it is still one of the leading economies in the world and has the growth numbers to show that. But today, the world is becoming, as we all know, much more competitive, and much more unpredictable. So like in all times, this economy cannot be left on autopilot, and today, more than ever, it needs active planning and leadership. And I know the government's initiatives, such as the Ontario Business Growth Initiative, is an example of some of that active leadership. And all of that happens to be the primary objective of our new minister, Minister Del Duca. He was first elected to the Ontario Legislature in 2012 and served as a parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Finance. The minister was then re-elected in 2014 and appointed to the transportation portfolio. Under his leadership, that ministry was known for its support of strong investments as well as modernizing transportation systems and transportation infrastructure. Minister Del Duca did not come to these roles unprepared, as he had studied political science and gained a law degree from Osgoode Hall in advance of entering the political realm. And he also had a proven personal record of dedication to the community before he even entered politics as an MPP for Vaughan, as he chaired the annual Vaughan Hospital Fundraising Gala, which raised tens of thousands of dollars and actually in excess of $1 million. So we are proud to have him. As I mentioned earlier, he'll also kind enough to make some time to answer some questions, so please write down your questions, and I'll be happy to pose them to the minister once his remarks are complete. And at this point, it is my honor and my pleasure to honor Minister Del Duca to the Canadian Club podium. The Canadian Club podium is yours, Minister.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am so deeply honored to be here with all of you this afternoon and to speak again, as Danny mentioned, 1 year to the day since the last time that I had the chance to be at this incredible podium. I want to thank Danny and the entire team here at the Canadian Club for helping to organize this and for giving me this chance. And I look out across this room, I see so many familiar faces and friends. If it's okay with you, Danny, I just want to highlight, I have one very, very key friend who's here with us today, one of my colleagues from the legislature. I want to begin by acknowledging and asking my very dear friend, the MPP for Trinity Spadina, Han Dong, to please stand and be acknowledged. Now, some in the room will know that Han and I, we actually go back a long, long way, and we used to work together for someone who is now a former federal member of parliament. We were both staff to this MP and to this minister. We've known each other now, I want to say, a little bit more than 2 decades would be my guess. I don't understand how it's possible that he still has a full head of hair, and I don't. But my wind sprints are better than yours, okay, Han? That's all I'm going to say from the podium. Anyway, I'm so thrilled to be here. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us this afternoon, for taking the time in a busy week out of your busy schedules to listen to me go forward with a little bit of a discussion about Ontario's economy. And of course, given my role as Minister of Economic Development and Growth, speaking about our province's economy is something that is really important to me, and it's an important topic of mine, but it's actually my second favorite topic. So my first favorite topic, the thing that I'm most delighted to speak about, are my kids, my daughters, Talia and Grace, who are 10 and 6 respectively. And I wanted to share a little story with you. Just this morning at breakfast, my 6-year-old, Grace, was asking me what I would be doing with my day today. As many of you will know, kids engage in these kinds of conversations, and they're always the most honest with the way they talk to you about these things. I told Grace that I'd be here in this particular venue with all of you, and that I would be delivering a speech. And so she looked at me, and she asked me, "What's a speech?" I thought about it for a second, and I said to her, well, a speech is kind of like the bedtime story that I occasionally read to you, but it's for adults. So she looked at me and said, "Does that mean that when you're finished, the adults go to sleep?" And I said, "Oh, sweetheart, sometimes they don't even wait that long." So, as I mentioned, I am delighted to be here with all of you to talk a little bit about Ontario's economic story. And from my perspective, this is a story that we don't tell often enough. This story has 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is the beginning, how we found ourselves, how we got to this particular point. Chapter 2 is where we find ourselves today, in this moment. And chapter 3 is where we go next. And to me, this is the chapter that's the most exciting and challenging of them all. So let's start at the beginning. About 10 years ago, the global recession, as you will all recall, hit us pretty hard. It hit everyone pretty hard. From October 2008 until May 2009, in a mere 7 months, our province lost 243,000 jobs. We had, at that point in time, a decision to make. Should we slash and burn, cut services deeply, and balance the books? Or should we invest in our people, invest in our critical infrastructure, and keep our economy running? Ontario, at that critically important moment, made a bold choice. We chose to invest. Now, at that point in time, and frankly, at times since, critics have questioned that move. And there are other places in the world that chose to go in a different direction. But here in Ontario, we chose, in our example, in our auto sector, and in education, and in healthcare, and in innovation. And it turns out, as we look back at the last decade, it turns out that we made the right choice. Economists agree, and history shows, that the places that stood up for workers, that the places that protected jobs, including Ontario, positioned themselves for success down the road. Well, that was 10 years ago. You know what else happened 10 years ago? My oldest daughter was born. Our oldest daughter was born. Now, I told you that my kids are my favorite subject. And because you think about it, they're smart, and they're funny, and they're creative. And I promise you that I'm not bragging, because it's pretty clear that they take after their mother. And for those who don't know, Utilia is here with us today at this luncheon. But my kids, our kids, are also optimistic. They can look forward to a bright future with great jobs ahead, and that's thanks to all of you and to the people of this province. Because 10 years ago, collectively, you made a decision to support a government that kept our teachers employed, that innovated, and that invested in companies that are hiring today, so that my kids and yours are getting the education they need for the jobs that they want. And I think it's important for us to pause on that point just for a moment, because to me it proves something that's very important. The decisions that we make today can have far-reaching effects that are very close to home. Which brings us to the second chapter of Ontario's amazing economic story, where we find ourselves today. In the last 10 years, Ontario has created 800,000 new jobs. To put that in perspective, that's 15 Rogers Centres, or a line of people stretching from Peterborough all the way to London, or an average of 273 new jobs created every single day since 2009. And most of these jobs are good jobs. They are in the private sector, and they are full-time. This is a very big deal, and something that we should be proud of. Our unemployment rate has been below the national average for almost 3 years now. We're leading Canada in foreign direct investment, and we're outpacing the entire G7 in growth. Now, our government played a part, and I believe we played an important part. We helped create a competitive tax structure. We supported a productive and highly skilled workforce. We invested in infrastructure. We did all of this. We did more. We created the Jobs and Prosperity Fund, which we used to support strategic investments that have created or supported more than 46,000 jobs since 2013 in every corner of Ontario. So we did do our part. But you, and people like you right across our province, you did the heavy lifting. You expanded, you hired, you made our economy strong. But here's the thing. I can cite all of the positive stats, and trust me when I tell you, each and every one of these stats is true. But if you're talking to a family member or a friend, and that person is still out of work, or they're struggling, you don't say, yes, but statistically, you're better off. You ask, what can I do to help? What more can I do to help? Because that's what we do in a caring society, a society where people look out for one another. And that's what we do in our government. We care about our people, and we care about providing them with opportunity. We ask, what more can be done for the vulnerable, for the undervalued, for those who are simply looking for work? Well, I know that for our Premier and for the people alongside whom I work each and every day, it's simply not enough for us to point to stats that say our economy is doing well. We want people to find opportunity in that strong economy. Young workers, families, single parents, seniors, new Canadians, everyone to feel that strong economy supporting them. Well, that's one reason, maybe it's the most important reason, that we chose to raise the minimum wage. Now, I know that some here in this room, the very employers who have helped turn our economy around, are finding that choice a little bit hard to contend with, particularly in businesses or in sectors where the margins are tight, and that is understandable. But in the end, for me, it comes down to this. If there are kids who don't look at their future with the same kind of hope as my kids, if there are mums and dads struggling to make a decent wage when all of the statistics say our economy is strong, then we have an obligation to do more for them. When my grandfather came here to Canada from Italy in 1951, and my father followed him in 1958, among other things, they were attracted by the promise of an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. And that's the principle, my friends, that we are fighting hard to maintain, because we believe that it reflects a fundamental value deeply held by Ontarians, and that value is fairness. Now, of course, at the same time, we know, particularly in my ministry, that we need to be fair to our job creators too. Well, that's why we eliminated the capital tax, and we reduced the corporate income tax rate for small business from 4.5% down to 3.5%. It's why we've been cutting unnecessary red tape to help our businesses grow and flourish. As a government, we are on the side of both employers and employees, because we're on the side of Ontarians. And we're not just looking at the end of this particular election cycle. We're looking way beyond, to the decades ahead. Now, too often, from my perspective, too many politicians are more afraid of being judged harshly by voters in the present than they are inspired by the opportunity to help their own kids and grandkids in the future. Well, this is one of the things that makes me proudest to be an Ontario Liberal. We're not afraid to make bold choices today that will pay off tomorrow. And this notion, this principle, brings me to the next and most exciting chapter in Ontario's story. It also brings me to what some of the challenges are, challenges that we will need to grapple with, but I'm confident we'll do so successfully as we go forward. Last week in our budget, we laid out a plan for how we think that next chapter of Ontario's economy should unfold. Our economic plan is to invest in our people. Here's the reality of Ontario's 21st century economy. Our competitors aren't places that make low-value goods in low-skill and low-wage economies. Here in this room, you know this better than I. We compete with places in the world that create high-value, high-quality goods produced by highly skilled and educated workforces. Places like Germany, Japan, and New York, and California. To keep our competitive edge, one of the things we're doing is putting money back in the pockets of Ontario families so that they can get on with the job of building opportunity for themselves and for their families and their kids, and also a great economy for all of us. That's why we invested in post-secondary education, including more affordable tuition for middle-income families and free tuition for lower-income families, so that more of our workers have the skills they need to compete in the global economy. So, for example, for a family with just one child in university, free tuition represents thousands of dollars in savings over the course of 4 years. And so that more of us, including young moms and dads, have the time and the resources that they need to find and keep a great job, our budget announced that we'll be investing in free childcare for preschool-aged children. It's important to note that this particular investment will save families an average of $17,000 per child during these preschool years. We're also providing pharmacare for young people up to the age of 25, which will in turn help many of those same families. And just so Ontarians don't have to worry as much about their aging parents, we're investing in pharmacare for seniors and improving their quality of life at home and in better long-term care. And to attract and keep more high-value jobs in Ontario, we have directly invested in companies that produce those high-value goods through our renewed and rejuvenated Jobs and Prosperity Fund. Specifically in this budget, this fund will be receiving an additional $900 million over the next 10 years. It's great news. It's great news. Now, all of what I've just mentioned is in addition to the investments that we are all making together in those things that we cannot build alone, like roads, bridges, rails, schools, and hospitals. We're investing about $230 billion in infrastructure over 14 years in those priority projects. And thanks to what you and I have been able to do together, our air and water is cleaner. There are no more brownouts, and there are no more smog days. All of this activity has built a strong foundation for Ontarians to go out, get to work, and seize more opportunity, and make Ontario a better bet for investors. And the people of our province and the businesses here in our province are doing exactly that. We have the lowest unemployment in almost 20 years, and companies from Amazon to Ford and so many others are looking to invest even more in Ontario. And yet, as I mentioned a moment ago, there are challenges, and we have to remain vigilant because we know that there are major issues facing us that we will need to overcome together. The first is Nafta. We've been working tirelessly with the federal government and our partners in the United States to find a positive path forward on Nafta. Our Premier has led this fight, and she's led it relentlessly. She's worked with almost 40 governors across the United States to make the case for free trade. We've reminded our American partners that 9 million U.S. jobs depend upon and are supported by trade and investment between the U.S., Ontario, and Canada. And over the last number of months since I started in this particular role, I've had the pleasure, alongside the Premier and Minister Michael Chan, to meet with U.S. leaders in Montreal, New York, Washington, and Mexico City. Now, it's clear to me that people in the United States know that our economies are linked. So we're going to keep engaging with U.S. officials at the state and federal level to advocate for the importance of Ontario-U.S. trade. But make no mistake, we're also going to keep fighting for our workers and for our businesses. We're staying tough because we know that there's a lot at stake. And this is, of course, why, among other things, we introduced legislation to respond to those states that adopt Buy American policies. Our government, Our government will not let our workers and our businesses be pushed around. That I can assure you. Now, we're taking a distinctly different approach to the economy that is occasionally at odds with our critics. And frankly, we're on a path that is not necessarily the path or the route that many other places in the world are embracing or taking. We believe that a fair society equals a strong economy. Policies like raising the minimum wage, providing free pharmacare for young people 25 and under, along with more affordable tuition for middle-income families and free tuition for low-income families. My friends, these are not just policies that make society stronger. These are principles that make our economy stronger. Because we're now seeing, in places, including in the United States in particular, what happens when people feel left out. What happens when they feel disengaged and hopeless? When they don't see that bright next chapter for their own kids. In those moments, they are often attracted to people who pander to their anger and their frustration, to people who tell them that they should fear the future. It's like Bobby Kennedy once famously said, "There are people in every time and in every land who want to stop history in its tracks. They fear the future, mistrust the present, and invoke the security of a comfortable past, which in fact never existed." Look at some of the places in the world where leaders are trying to stop history in its tracks. On civil rights, on gun control, on income inequality. It creates uncertainty. It creates unrest. It chases away entrepreneurship, investment, and innovation. Because business leaders know you cannot build a 21st century company or a 21st century economy. You cannot attract bright, innovative, diverse, educated, globally minded workers if a government is bent on trying to turn back the clock to a non-existent past, where there is no threat of climate change, where kids don't need to learn about their bodies and their health in school, where you don't need to take public transit to get anywhere. Well, that's where Ontario Liberals and our government in particular are different. We're not afraid of what comes next. We believe that social progress is right and good because we know that it also leads to economic progress. Because social stability, creating a society where people are hopeful, where they're engaged, is the key to building our economic future. Look, to me, here's the bottom line. When Amazon put Ontario on its short list of sites for its new global headquarters, it wasn't because we offered them a tax break or cash. They put us on the list because our economy here in Ontario is vibrant and creative, because our people are diverse and talented, because our workforce is well educated and hardworking, and because we have a great quality of life, an open view of the world, and a sense of inequality are the things that make an economy competitive in the 21st century. Look around. We live in an amazing, disruptive, and frankly, breathtaking moment in history. In a few short years, we've gone from the web to smartphones and artificial intelligence and cybersecurity and the Internet of Things, big data, nanotech, autonomous and connected systems, and the list goes on. But the pace of change itself is amazing. It's dizzying. It's exponential. And the places that win in a world growing faster by the second are the ones that are first to innovate, first to produce, and first to get to market. Well, that's the exciting challenge of our new economy. And the good news, ladies and gentlemen, is that you and I, years ago, put Ontario on track to compete and win in this new economy, because we're investing in our people, and our people are succeeding spectacularly. Forbes magazine said just last month that Ontario is one of the best places on the planet for high-tech firms to set up shop right now. They said that we're succeeding because we're open to immigrants, because we care for our sick, and because we're hoarding the world's top talent. And we're not stopping there. We're not resting on our laurels. Right now, we're graduating 40,000 STEM students, the second best in North America, and that's something to be proud of. But recently, we announced that we're growing that to 50,000 over the next 5 years, a 25% increase. And when we've done that, we will be, on a per capita basis, the #1 producer of STEM graduates in all of North America. We're also making sure that we have artificial intelligence talent. In the next 5 years, we will be graduating another 1,000 applied master's students in AI fields through a $30 million investment. So the key in this new economy is to continue with unwavering courage down the path that we're already on, to keep planning ahead for the decades ahead. Because if we stop now, if we give in to the temptation to go backwards, we risk it all. If our critics have their way and cut those important investments, well, they'll be depriving a single mom of the daycare she needs to get a full-time job, or the young entrepreneur of the pharmaceutical drugs he needs so that he can follow his dreams, or taking away the resources our schools need to train that next generation of skilled workers. More Ontario families would pay more of those expenses out of their own pockets again, and more would struggle again. And that kind of outcome would put all of us and all of our progress at risk. In a 21st century economy, you simply cannot cut your way to the top. The only way to grow an economy is to grow skills and grow opportunity so that Ontario businesses can grow more good, high-paying jobs. That's why our economic plan, again, is to invest in our people, to succeed, so that when we succeed, we're doing it together. In the end, none of us knows exactly what the next chapter of Ontario's story holds. But I think we can make a pretty educated guess by asking our kids what they want and what they expect for their own future. Because if you speak to your kids about this, as we do from time to time, well, they believe that they can do anything. They believe that they can change the world, they can change their world, they can shape and improve their world for the better. And you know what? I'm pretty sure they will. But first, they need our help. They need our help right here and right now. They need us to keep choosing wisely, to keep investing well, to choose our next step with great care, remembering, as I said right off the top today, that the decisions we collectively make today can have far-reaching effects very close to home. I hope and I trust that as leaders, as parents and as grandparents, and as Ontarians, that we share this commitment. A commitment to an Ontario that is as compassionate as it is competitive. An Ontario that is as fair as it is fiscally sound. And to an Ontario that kids who live somewhere else in the world dream of making their home, and where the kids, like mine, who are growing up here, are proud to call home. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Minister. Unfortunately, we do have time for a couple of questions. So I have the first question from our very thoughtful students from the Monk School, and their question is related to this, that there's a new report which suggests automation could threaten 35 to over 40% of Canadian jobs. Minister, what plans or ideas do we have to try to adapt to that future potential reality?
So I really appreciate that question. It is a really, really good question, and it's a question that I will say we don't only grapple with here in the province of Ontario. I think it's a question that challenges governments around the world, because we know, as I mentioned in my remarks, we know that we are already living in an era of disruption where we see more and more automation. We know we're not going to be able to stop that, nor should we necessarily want to. Most of the major transformative revolutions that we've had throughout history have led to new opportunities for growth. But I would say in this era and in the era coming at us pretty quickly, what is most important, which is why I stressed it repeatedly in my remarks, is that we continue to grow the talent pool that we have available to us here. Because when it comes to those jobs, and this doesn't cut equally across every single sector, when it comes to those jobs that are most likely to be at risk initially because of continued automation, we can inoculate ourselves to an extent against that if we continue to have a very highly educated, highly skilled workforce that can take advantage of those jobs that aren't as easy to automate. But I would say there is no magic solution to this one, and governments literally around the world are looking at a whole raft of options with respect to how to deal with this. But it is a great question, and I'm happy to hear that it's a question that's come from students, because it will be a question that you as younger Ontarians will have to help us grapple with successfully. But I'm confident that we can.
Wonderful. Thank you, Minister. And by the way, if you can pass a law so they cannot automate lawyers, that would be great. Put my vote in there. Another question, I think our last question here, which is Ontario just announced its response to the U.S. First policy. Do you think it will be effective in today's environment? And what would we do if we face some further isolationism? Do we have kind of a plan? What are our plan B and C on that front as we look ahead in this unpredictable world?
You know, so we've got a couple of states south of the border, particularly New York and to an extent Texas, that have decided to go, for the time being, down a bit of a path around Buy America policies. Our Premier has said repeatedly, Ontario is not looking for a trade war. Ontario is a place that relies on trade. We do well with trade. I've said this today. I've said it in many other opportunities from various podiums. When our businesses and our workers have the opportunity to compete fairly with anyone in the world, we compete and we win. But at the end of the day, we also have to make sure that we are consistently standing up for our workers and our businesses. It's why we did pass legislation at Queen's Park that provides us with the opportunity to respond in a commensurate way, in a reciprocal way, should states like New York just recently in the last couple of days have gone down that unfortunate path. I think it's really important for us to send a message that while we do rely on an open, free, and fair border with the United States, they rely on that with Ontario as well. If you think about it, 9 million jobs, as I mentioned in my remarks today, that rely on trade with Canada and Ontario. But more than that, there are 20 states south of the border for whom Ontario is the #1 trading partner. Not Canada, not the rest of the world, Ontario. And in our travels and in the Premier's engagement with U.S. governors, whether it's Indiana, the governor of Indiana was just in town a few days ago, or it's Michigan, or it's Ohio, or it's a whole bunch of other states with whom she's been speaking and we've been speaking, there is at a state level, by and large, a fairly clear understanding that we do rely on each other and that it works well. We, as I'm sure everyone in the room knows, are grappling with what I will gently call an unpredictable administration in the Oval Office. There is work that is ongoing between our federal government and ourselves and our business community on both sides of the border to make sure that everybody understands exactly what the benefits are. But we have no intention, again, to escalate. We simply want to be in a position to respond so that we are very clearly, as we should be, as is a core responsibility of your government, to defend our workers and our businesses, and we will not be pushed around.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Wonderful, thank you. And now it's my pleasure just to conclude our event and to take a moment to thank the Minister. But before I do that, I just wanted to ensure that I had an opportunity to once again thank our very generous sponsors for today's event. Again, Bombardier, Carpenters District Council of Ontario, and the Trillium Automobile Dealers Association. Thank you very much for your continued support. And Minister Del Duca, we all want to thank you for making time for us today on the eve of a very important election. We want to thank you for your leadership, your vision, and the sacrifice of you and your family to make our province more prosperous. We also want to thank you for your thoughts and your vision for the future of our economy, which is these important ideas and these important initiatives of bold investment, of also looking to balance that employer-employee relationship so that everyone feels that they can contribute in a fair way and benefit in a fair way in our economy, and also through the lens that you are taking to look and see what that future will look like, and that's the lens through our children's eyes, which is really ultimately the dream of Canada, which is each generation ensures that that next generation is better off. And that is something that we can all unite around. So with that, thank you again for spending time today. And we know you are not afraid of the future, and that hopefully the greatest days are ahead for this province and a shared prosperity for us all. Thank you again, Minister. And thank you all again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at another event. Have a great afternoon. God bless. Take care.